The fighter is an interesting melee class that requires the player to be focusing on hitting either the front or the back of the enemy, while also keeping their health low for big bonuses towards their damage and resource management. The weapons they use are the double saber, twin daggers, and knuckles. The double sabers are like a double-sided spear that allows you to perform twirls, spins, throws, and fast-hitting combo-looking skills. This weapon is usually seen as fighters' main weapon, as it can easily adapt to any situation by being extremely proficient in both AoE mobbing and single-target bossing. The double saber's focus gauge fills when landing attacks, and when using the weapon action with at least one bar of focus, or 1/3 of the gauge, you will release a whirlwind around yourself. You can have 2 of these active at any given time, and they also help contribute to focus accumulation too. However, whether you have focus or not, the weapon action will also act like a block for its duration. It is usually suggested to instead release these whirlwinds with the aid of a specific skill ring that doesn't exist yet on the NA beta. I'll be mentioning this ring a little bit more later in the video when I go over the few rings you should consider using. The twin daggers will allow you to perform quick attacks, but are limited to a much smaller AoE range than the double sabers. That all being said, they are decent for bossing, but not as great when mobbing. With these, your goal is to be airborne as much as possible, and this is because the twin daggers focus gauge can only raise when you're in the air. When at 2 out of 3 bars full, you'll gain a 20% damage bonus, and when full, this turns into a 50% additional damage bonus. Your main form of filling this is by jumping and double jumping. If you touch the ground, however, you will lose all of your accumulated focus. But that's not all. When using the weapon action for twin daggers, you will do a spin or twirl animation, which is kind of like a 360-degree block. But this also gives you 1 bar of focus too. When doing this, you can also control the direction you move as well. The knuckles are your typical brawler type weapons, and they can hit really hard, but this is in return for having basically no range whatsoever. That being said, they are not used too often by many, but they're still pretty decent. Their gear is actually pretty simple compared to the other ones too. So long as you keep attacking, it'll raise very quickly, and this increases your attack speed too. However, jumping will cause the gauge to completely deplete. Now, when using the weapon action for these, you'll perform a quick dip, dodge, or duck known as sway. This grants an iframe for its short duration and is meant to be used in between attacks, as it won't interrupt combos such as Tech Art's perfect attack bonus, which we'll be going over in just a minute. Let's now get into the stances you'll have access to. The first and main one you'll probably be using is called Valiant Stance, and this is previously known as Brave Stance. This one raises your damage you do when attacking the front side of an enemy by 40% and 35% to the rear. Its stance up modifier adds another 10% damage when hitting the front. The other stance, Wise Stance, can be seen as almost the exact opposite of Valiant Stance. However, it is usually best to only take Valiant Stance, and there are a few reasons for this. First off, when using Fighter as a main class, you just won't have enough skill points to max them and their modifiers out completely. When the cap raises to 95, you will have enough points to take both of them, but it's still usually suggested to only take one of them, as your points could be used better elsewhere to further boost either one of the stances. The next reason would be enemies usually end up facing you a lot of the time, and their heads are usually easier to hit from the front too. Lastly, many bosses are just hard to get behind consistently. Therefore, all that time you're spending trying to reposition yourself behind an enemy will end up just being the same amount of damage you'd get by staying in front and not having to worry about it with Valiant Stance. So feel free to buy another skill tree to swap to when you want to use it, but when first starting out, and in general, Valiant will make your life much easier. Next up is something called Tech Art's Perfect Attack. This is a passive skill on your tree that changes the order in how you use your weapon skills in return for a damage bonus and a PP cost reduction on skills when you take its modifier below it. It's really simple though. All you need to do to gain these bonuses is to make sure not to use the same PA or weapon skill in a row, and to make sure to perfect attack each one of them. If you are unfamiliar with what a perfect attack is, it's basically when you attack as soon as the bubble around you that you gain after any attack turns red. I actually created a video about perfect attacks recently if you want to know more. There's actually a few more things to this though. One would be that you can weave a normal attack in between weapon skills to keep the buff going. Just make sure that you perfect attack the normals, then make sure to use a different weapon skill after the normal that you did before it. And a sidestep strike will not count towards this and will break the combo too. Moving on, there's another very interesting active skill that you will probably be basing a lot of your gameplay around, and this can turn many away from playing the fighter class too. And this is called Overload on North American version, previously known as Limit Break. When you activate this skill, it will instantly drop you to 25% of your max health for a 20% damage bonus when maxed. This will in turn also activate other passives you can spec into that increase your damage when under 50% and 25% health respectively. I'll be getting into all of this a lot more in my fighter skill tree video I made to go along with this one. But for now, the takeaway from this will be that this is something you should expect to be using a lot of the time. And that being said, you will die a lot because of this, and everyone does. Just get back up and try again. I'd like to now get into some of the rings that you should look into. The first one would be the one I hinted at earlier when going over the Double Saber. This ring isn't currently available on NA, but it's something you will definitely want to take if you use Double Saber a lot when it comes out. Currently, it's known as Left Kimitachi, but since it's not in game yet, we don't know what its translated name is going to be. Some believe it may be eventually called Whirlwind, but that's just speculation. Anyways, this allows you to activate the whirlwinds around yourself by using the weapon skills instead of the weapon action, and this doesn't consume any focus either when doing so. Some skills even proc 2 whirlwinds at once with this. Next are 2 left rings that essentially do the same thing, and are for the Twin Daggers and Knuckles. They are known as Twin Daggers Air Pursuit and Knuckles Pursuit. When using them while in their respective weapon, they will chase your target when using weapon skills and normal attacks so long as you are locked on. The only difference between the two is, you must be in the air for the Twin Dagger one to work, and you must be on the ground for the Knuckles one to work. There's also a combined skill ring that'll eventually be in the game that combines all 3 of the previous rings I just mentioned into one. Again, this is something we do not have the NA name yet for since it does not exist yet in our version of the game, but it will probably be called something like Left Pursuit Wide Support, or something with Pursuit in it. Another truly amazing ring is the left ring Leaping Dodge. This allows you to jump higher and faster, and since a lot of fighter revolves around being in the air, this is great. It's also just a pretty nice ring to have in general, as it can be used on many classes effectively. The only right rings I'd like to mention for now are Critical Field, and this boosts you and everyone in the field's crit rate by a lot and will cap you at 100% when using it. The other right ring that's worth looking into is the fighter's version of the effort symbol ring, which again is something I don't think is in the game yet, so the name is likely to change. This reduces the damage taken, slightly boosts your damage, and also grants a 10% crit rate when maxed. And every class has a version of this ring, and it should be worth looking into for just about any class you play, depending on what you want to be doing. As far as subclasses are concerned, it's probably best if you just choose Hunter to go alongside your fighter, as it offers so much damage and survivability. With Hunter, you'll be getting access to Fury Stance, which adds a flat damage and crit rate boost, all passively with no conditions to meet whatsoever to use. You will also get an extra 20% damage to perfect attacks, and this is great since your goal on fighter is to hit as many perfect attacks as possible because of Tech Art's perfect attack bonus. You will also have access to a skill, Iron Will, that gives you a chance to survive an otherwise lethal hit. Fighter eventually gets their own version of this too in a later version of the game, and this works alongside the Hunter skill in the form of a priority of activation system. And last but not least, the active buff Hunter Physique. In this, at max, has a 50% uptime and grants a 25% damage reduction and stops you from being knocked up or knocked back. With all that being said, it's almost like Hunter is made specifically to be a fighter sub. If you want to know how to build fighter skill tree, check out the skill tree video I made to go along with this one. And with that everyone, take care.